4B is another regulatory action, is addressing the impairment and is expected to address the impairment in a reasonable amount of time. So no TMDL is needed. 4C is, it's been ascertained that the impairment is not due to a pollutant. Its sole cause is due to a pollution. Therefore, a TMDL is not needed. So looking at it in that framework, which is the proper context and the proper framework for the entire integrated report, is practically speaking, can we develop a TMDL to address the pollutant impairment? Having a tool in our toolbox to address flow is solely form over substance if it compels no regulatory action. And it is certainly within this board's discretion to discern whether to adhere to EPA's continued guidance that 4C flow impairments only occur after it's been discerned that there's no pollutant impairment. But what needs to be recognized is it's a placeholder that compels no further action.
Thank you. Any questions? I think, thank you very much. No, go ahead. Sure.
Actually, thank you. That was very clear. But I guess it's a matter of, you know, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, or the cart before the horse. If there's no water, it doesn't really matter how much pollutant you put in there, whether you crank down the pollutant or not. There's no water.
And that's certainly the conundrum and the issue. When staff discussed in the staff report the difficulty in identifying the impairment due to flow based on a lack of methodology, the issue there is several. Number one, while the listing policy does contain a weight of the evidence approach, that weight of the evidence approach is not, you know, a preponderance of the evidence. There's actually structured criteria that needs to be followed. But before we even get to whether that approach is available for flow, you have to look at the listing policy that is solely structured explicitly and expressly for pollutant impairments.
Not pollution.
Not pollution.
So why would we apply it to flows?
So that's why it wasn't applied. I think it was acknowledged as at least an approach in the pollutant realm, you know, to borrow, I think anecdotally, the approach that could be discerned and followed, and even with trying to go through a weight of the evidence approach, one of the very express criterions under the weight of the evidence approach is scientifically defensible and reproducible methods. A related conundrum there is we're ascertaining a flow impairment isn't simply looking at a dry creek bed. Pollution is a term of art, and it's defined as man-made alteration. So it extends beyond what needs to be ascertained is we're beyond seasonal variations or other issues that potentially have no bearing on water diversions. Do you have anything to add?
Excuse me. Let's move on, and we have 5 more cards. So, Nathaniel, you are almost here.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Spivey-Weber and members of the board. My name is Nathaniel Cain. I'm with Environmental Law Foundation. I'm going to try to be extremely brief. And I really only have one point, which is show us the water. We're here to talk about 303D listings, and I'm actually really glad that the conversation turned to public trust issues, because I was probably going to talk about that anyway. But I think implicit in staff's report and the conclusion not to list for flow is the idea that the state board will take other action under public trust and other its other legal authority to address flow. And I'm really encouraged by Mr. Howard's remarks earlier about all the all the action that the staff is taking towards addressing flow. But what I noted in those remarks is that there was a lot of going to do this, going to do that, going to do this, going to do that. And I just want to make the point that I don't think that anyone on this side of the room who's here to talk about flow is going to relax and stop working on this until we actually see water in the rivers. And it's very encouraging that 30 years after the Mount Lake case, the State Board is taking this responsibility seriously to protect the public trust resource. But we are not going to consider this job done until there's water in the rivers. So show us the water. Thank you very much.
Susan.
I'm Susan Corum with the Creek Tribe. And so Mr. Hatter already talked about how in the California Water Action Plan the Shasta River is listed, which is great. I'd like to let you know about studies that are already available on the Shasta. McBain and Associates has already finalized the Canyon study and the Spring study, and those studies have been both reviewed by the Ocean Protection Council, so they're ready to go. We don't need to do duplicative science and keep producing more science. Fish and Wildlife is also doing a study right now, which I hope the State Water Board and the Regional Water Board are actively working with them so that can get finalized. What we'd like to see to do is have the State Water Board use the existing studies and work directly with Fish and Wildlife, and then we want them to take those studies to get a numerical flow objective so that those can be inserted into the Region 1's basin plan. This is what we would like to have happen. We hope that when that does happen, the State Water Board will be supportive, and they will also use this to regulate flows through their Water Rights Division. What Mr. Fisher from Riverkeeper was talking about, one of the ways you could do that is also doing 1707 permanent in-stream flow dedication. I see there's a lot of water buying transactions happening on the river. I don't think that's a successful long-term solution. I think we need more long-term solutions that aren't just short little Band-Aid fixes. And then as far as the Scott River, when we had the flow workshop, Ms. Whitney said time and time again that fish need water. Well, here's a river that needs water. This is the Scott River watershed, and this isn't in the middle of the summer. This isn't a river that's supposed to go dry every year. This is a major tributary to the Klamath River. This tributary, this was October of last year. This is when the fish should already be running and spawning. This is the main stem of the river. So to have there absolutely no water with, you see there's ATV tracks in the middle of the water, in the middle of the dry bed of the stream, just doesn't seem like we're going to have fish spawning here. Doesn't seem like the tribal trust resources are being protected as well as they could be by the state. One thing you should know about the Scott is last year it was an estimated 2/3 of the southern Oregon, Northern California coho spawned in this river. Again, I'm not sure how we're supposed to be protecting threatened species when there's no water in the river for months out of the year. Let's see. So, and one thing that I'd like to add for what Mr. Howard was saying, if you guys are going to do regional flow objectives, it can't just be for migration. I think that was something you mentioned. It would be if we look at migration barriers, if you do the beer can test or whatever it is. A lot of our tributaries are vital for our fisheries resources, for rearing habitat and cold water refugia. So just having enough water that an adult fish can get in is not protective. We have lethal temperatures in our main stem of our river during the summertime, and these fish will go and rear and hide and hang out and go eat up in these little tributaries during the day. So we need to make sure that that is protected as well. And so I guess, again, please show us the water. We can't wait on this. I don't think we need a flow objective for this. I think we just need water here, and there needs to be something here. It needs to happen now, because I don't know how many more years your coho can survive, the fall Chinook, and then how many more years there'll be fish for the tribe to fish for. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you guys would like this somewhere in the office, I'd be glad to leave it with your staff. Okay, and you can remember what you're working for. When
I think it should go into Mr. Howard's office.
Okay. When we get a picture of water back in the river, I'd be glad, and we can have a little party, and I'll bring you a new picture, okay? Does that sound
That'll
good?
be great. Thank you. Ben?
Good afternoon. Thank you. I'm Ben Pitterly with Santa Barbara Channel Keeper, and I'm here today hopefully just to get clarification on a couple of specific questions that we have. So Channel Keeper, the area that we work within, includes the Ventura River, which is somewhat unique in this discussion in that it currently has an existing impairment for pumping and diversions. And I'm here today because in the state's State Board staff report, the state outlines its intent to potentially pursue delisting of the Ventura River for pumping and diversions in a future Region 4 cycle. And we've been really struggling to understand exactly what desired effect or benefit the state's hoping to achieve by taking such an action. The only rationale that's currently been offered by the state really has nothing to do with the facts of the Ventura River itself. It simply states that the original listing occurred before the state's listing policy was adopted. So understanding that staff here is likely unfamiliar with specific facts and conditions of the Ventura River, we took some time to outline a robust list of lines of evidence in our comments that included findings by the U.S. EPA, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, National Marine Fisheries Service, this State Water Board, as well as studies recently commissioned by the City of Ventura and others that concluded that beneficial uses are currently being impaired in this river by pumping and diversions. And I want to highlight, just because the discussions has gone to the issue of whether or not some of these dry reaches is natural or seasonal. These studies have specifically looked at the effect of anthropogenic impacts on flow. By this weight of evidence, we believe it's quite clear that the existing listing is totally appropriate and compatible with the state's existing listing policy. What isn't compatible, what wouldn't be compatible, is the state's proposal to potentially delist when not a single line of evidence has been presented to show that the listing is in fact inappropriate. Now, the response that we were given in the response to comments, however, was that the weight of evidence criteria can't be applied in this circumstance because the listing policy doesn't apply to pollution. And I'm struggling with an apparent conflict even in today's discussion. I've heard Mr. Howard today say that in fact a weight of evidence approach could be fine for such listings. So our question is, respectfully, which is it? Again, the only rationale given for potentially delisting is that the listing was created before the policy was adopted, but then the state also says the listing policy doesn't apply. And we believe it's hard to have that both ways.
I have a question for you, because you're in a situation that's kind of unique. Has more water come into the Ventura River because of the listing?
No, so I was thinking about that question. It is an example, though, of, I heard it said earlier that, you know, the only benefit of doing these listings in the first place are actions that then the board can take, regulatory actions that the board can take as a result of the listing. And I don't entirely agree with that. That's one benefit, but other entities can also do things, and this is Ms. Sheehan included some of these things in her list of 5 benefits of listing, right? One example in Ventura County was that the Ventura County Board of Supervisors did adopt a well moratorium in light of the drought and concern over water shortages. And that's a perfect example of an instance in which the impairment on the Ventura River was used, you know, in public comment and testimony to support a well moratorium. There are often local actions and planning processes and things that municipalities can do. And arguably that will benefit the river. So just to conclude, you know, our question is, how does the board reconcile this sort of apparent conflict with the policy? What precisely is the rationale for potentially delisting, and moreover, what exactly is the state hoping to achieve in doing that, given that all existing information does indicate that beneficial uses are currently impaired by pumping and diversions? And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
And Sarah, shall we, do you want to
Want a
respond
response?
to that?
Sure, yeah. So the thinking behind that is that the 303 delisting policy, as Stacy iterated, is for pollutant-based impairments only, and so the listing policy also applies to pollutant-based impairments. So the fact that these were done back in 1998 and are on the 303D list is inappropriate. It's in conflict with the actual regulation. In fact, EPA tried to do a TMDL for flow in Ventura and failed, and they abandoned it. And now they have actually have addressed the flow issues through an exotics, vegetation, and eutrophication TMDL. So that's how they're addressing the flow, is through a nutrients TMDL in that area. I actually had talked with Region 4 staff about any benefits they realized by having these listings in their region over the last almost 2 decades, and they couldn't really identify any. So that's our thinking, is that those listings were made in conflict to the regulation at a time when there was no consistent methodology put in place, so they were done incorrectly. That's our rationale.
Thank you very much. Sarah, let's set the clock for 6 minutes because she's representing two groups.
Thank you, board members. Sarah Amanzada. I'm the Executive Director of California Coastkeeper Alliance, and I'm here today to deliver comments on our own organization's behalf and also on behalf of Don McInhill with Russian River Keeper. Before I go into either set of comments, I just want to address the point about Section 303D versus Section 305B. And just sort of explain to staff, we do understand the difference between the two listings, and we've debated and sort of briefed the issues and different legalities and benefits, et cetera, myriad times over the past 4 years. And so when we refer to Section 303D, and at least I'm speaking for myself, it's a shorthand way to refer to the listing process and that. And we've discussed the possibility of doing either and which one might be better. So just for context, when we started this process, we were working with a different set of staff. So just to explain that, we do understand the difference. So I'll start with Don's comments. I'm sorry that he couldn't be here. Don has been very involved in this process over the past 5 years, and numerous creeks and rivers in the Russian River watershed are over-allocated with very low flows, including Macama Creek, Redwood Creek, and Marquess Creek. And just today, Don relayed to me that they are drilling 3 new wells along Macama Creek and planting another 300 acres of vineyards in that same area. And so we've talked a lot about the possible benefits of 303D listings or 305B listings and what they may or may not be. And from our perspective, it's not merely about relaying benefits, but also preventing further harm. It's very frustrating for people at the local level and advocates that see that these waters are already well over allocated and over diverted, and yet additional draws on the water are still being made. And so having that formal recognition on one of the lists is absolutely essential for these sorts of situations at the local level. And I'll just read Don's comments. If segments of the Russian River were listed for flow, then any project subject to CEQA or NEPA would have to investigate potential impacts on stream flows. A good example is the upcoming well ordinance revisions in Sonoma County that could be widened to require studies at the county level to determine if new wells would affect stream flow and require mitigations under CEQA. Currently, with no impairment listing, the county is refusing to address any possible issues regarding connectivity between new wells and stream flow depletion and only focus on well construction standards. Local advocates could use a flow impairment listing to expand the purview of the well ordinance revision to possibly require stream flow studies and other environmental documentation to demonstrate new wells would not affect habitat or water quality parameters such as temperature. That's Don McInhill, Russian River Keeper. In my remaining time, I'll now turn to Coastkeeper Alliance's comments. And as you all know, I've appeared numerous times before this board and previous board members and staff to testify in support of listing waterways impaired by flow. Having considered the legal and scientific issues numerous times over the past 5 years with my local water keepers, agency staff at all levels, including EPA and county staff, and my colleagues here today, I still firmly believe that listing for flows is scientifically and legally supported, and as Mr. Howard said, is essentially a policy decision. Acknowledging in the response to comments and in my conversations with many people in this room that the board may not choose to move forward with flow listings, but also recognizing that there's a very real desire from staff and members to do something about the situation in these waters. I'm just going to offer a few other avenues forward, and that could quite frankly happen parallel to listing for flows. And the first set is to just recognize the progress that has been made with the regional efforts and collaborations in the North Coast, and just ask the board to direct staff to continue these regional efforts and collaborations with stakeholders. The conversations in Region 1 have been extremely productive, and I hope that those can continue to develop regulatory tools and scientific methods. There's also been a lot of discussion today about, the necessity and work to develop a uniform assessment method for flow listings or scientifically defensible objectives, which has been raised repeatedly as a barrier to listing throughout this process. And, as board member Dodek pointed to, it makes me very nervous to think about that. This has been something that we've also briefed along the way extensively, and, these discussions have already gone on for 5 years, and it's very concerning and utterly dissatisfying to the advocates at the local level that the response coming out of all of this work is that we will commence another study or undertake development. So if the board does choose to move forward with an assessment method, I really urge you and ask you to try and expedite this work and just focus on a sort of a timely resolution to that, so that it doesn't drag out over time and that we can actually show us the water and get the water back in these rivers. The other sort of set of opportunities I think we have are around water bond allocations. I think that the board has some power to do several things with respect to water bond allocations. You could work with your fellow agencies at Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Wildlife Conservation Board to issue grant scoring criteria that prioritizes projects that permanently dedicate water for in-stream use. We can sort of expand or sort of continue the use of the priority list that Mr. Howard referenced in bond allocations as well, and prioritize projects for work in those areas. And of course, as Conrad mentioned, there is a lot that the board can do through its waste and unreasonable use and public trust doctrine. So I'll just say that I hope that the board moves forward to list waters impaired by flow. But if it chooses not to, or whether or not it chooses not to, there are a lot of other things that we can and should do, and we look forward to working with you on both those fronts. Thank you.
That's the end of the cards. Are there additional questions for staff or
Am I
others?
still allowed to talk?
Oh, you sure are. All of us are. You can go first this time. Do you have questions or comments?
You asked the question that I had, in terms of, the
What are we doing?
the experience using this tool and what benefits on the ground have occurred. So I think I'm satisfied.
Actually, before that happens, could I'd like to hear from staff in terms of Sarah's 3 suggestions.
I have 4 suggestions, but go ahead.
4 is good.
Recognizing regional efforts.
I would agree. I mean, I thought that the meeting that occurred in Region 1 was a great first step. I think it opened a lot of people's eyes to the complexity of flows, and it's not an easy topic to address. So I enjoy the conversations. It's more of a, what can we do that will actually result in some water back in the streams?
Show me the water.
Show me the water. I mean, that's the case. I'm just not convinced that this is the avenue to get that water. That being said, I would, even in the report and in the staff report and in the presentation, we have and would like to continue to work with the regions, with the Fish and Wildlife Agency, with the stakeholders to figure out alternative avenues beyond what's even currently being done that could possibly work in advancing flows. Phil can maybe add to that, but I think that's a great idea.
The second one was don't get bogged down, I'm paraphrasing, in a uniform assessment process.
And so, yeah, the fact that staff had problems making a determination with the lack of methodology, yeah, if you directed us to go out there and dedicate the staff's time, probably with the need of a contractor to develop some sort of methodology in place. You have to also, and to make a 305B finding under 4C, you have to consider what that effort would get you. Full Category 4C requires no regulatory action and is not on the big 303D list. That's the high priority one. What does it get you, and what if these water bodies are already listed as being impaired to pollutants? What does an additional 4C addition get you? So it's more of a policy decision on the benefits and the costs involved with that.
And then for Tom, I think the next one was the water bond allocations, working with our colleagues in Fish and Wildlife, as well as the Wildlife Conservation Board. Anyway, the Wildlife Board, on dedicating money to in-stream flow, high priority in-stream flow areas.
Yeah, well, certainly we will be working with Fish and Wildlife on that issue.
But I thought the Wildlife Board is a good, I mean, they get a lot of money. So can we add them to our
Yes.
outreach list? Okay. And then for Phil, the waste and unreasonable use and public trust doctrine, and actually Tom too, is that something that we are considering? In that for in-stream flow?
The answer is it's certainly within the board's purview, not on a systematic approach like this listing approach, but case by case, absolutely. Those are both tools that are available to the board.
I wasn't planning on saying anything else, but in response to that, I'll just say for those who've been working on this recommendation, that if you didn't have the benefit of observing some of the other actions that we've taken on waste and unreasonable use, I'll just say that I have a minority view. I don't think that that's an appropriate approach to take. We do have emergency authority, and so we did take action last year and this year on Deer Mill and Antelope Creeks. And I think that although us taking action probably did serve some benefit of getting the stakeholders in that area to be more realistic about entering into voluntary agreements, I'm just not comfortable with the use of that tool. So I will just say that you all know your local communities much better than I do. So I don't mean to overstate this, but I think that you can get a lot further with these voluntary agreements. So to the extent that we've got the 2010 report, the list that Mr. Howard was talking about, and prioritization of the California Water Action Plan, and the relationships that you all have with the fishery agencies, I would just encourage a more creative approach because where we can get those voluntary agreements, you can get water out to those streams a lot sooner than going through a very drawn-out regulatory approach, particularly under public trust. And with respect to waste and unreasonable use, we have that emergency regulatory authority, but I don't know, beyond that, using waste and unreasonable use as a tool. I'll just say, as the ag representative, on the board, there will be tremendous resistance by the agricultural community on waste and unreasonable use. I just don't think it's the right fit where you make a blanket statement that all activity is considered wasteful or unreasonable. So I think it's just a better approach to see what role through the cooperative approach that Board Member Moore was talking about, what role can we serve to help move those discussions along? Go ahead.
I sense that there's going to be a motion and a second. So let me just take this opportunity to acknowledge and really thank the staff, both at the state board as well as the regional board level, for your hard work on this effort, for grappling especially with the flow issue, which I think was above and beyond, I think, when we started this effort. Given I know staff's commitment and hard work on this, I certainly I'm certainly not going to oppose the motion, but given the somewhat unsatisfactory nature that this is heading into, at least for me, I also cannot support it. So I will be abstaining on this item.
Okay. And I,
No fault at all of staff.
but I would also ask that, because there is, I will be supporting or seconding perhaps, this motion, because I do think that we need a program to get water into these streams. I think that is so important, and I want to make sure that we are spending our resources as wisely as we can. I assume that we can still use Section 319 funding for this effort as when it comes up. I am getting some nods. And so, Tom, what I would appreciate is that you would consolidate into one section of your executive director's report the report on what is happening with in-stream flows for priority, for the rivers.
On that note, too, the standing item for the emergency drought has been really helpful at the board meetings, and I just wonder if, along with the executive director report specifying that we could maybe create something similar around in-stream flows.
Okay. Well, we can certainly consider that as well, but the faster thing will be, because we'll have to talk with Felicia and with this other senior staff, would be to consolidate this in one place so that people who are concerned about this can actually follow what it is we are actually doing. Because I'm basing my vote on the fact that we are actually going to do something that is going to be useful to fish and to streams. So.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll take the plans and policies table and break out all the flow stuff, plus add the other things that we're working on that isn't on the plans and policy table right now.
Right, and we will consider that. That's a good idea. Do you want to move?
Okay, move adoption of the resolution. Move adoption of the resolution.
I'll second, but I do have a question, Tom, or for staff. Do you think that, this additional commitment of resources, whether it's in the forthcoming BCP or even the drought-related staff resources that we have, are we going to, do you believe, over the next year or two, really show a greater presence of our Division of Water Rights in areas where there's real evidence of impairment due to flow?
Well, that is certainly my intent. I intend for that to happen, and we will have to, I'll be reporting to the board, and I've been making it clear that the important thing is to actually get across the finish line on some of these projects instead of just being in a constant state of, working on them. And so
and that's what I'm trying to do, to manage the expectations. I mean, I respect Board Member Dodek's history and experience in these challenges of statewide significance. But we haven't really heard from all sides on this issue as it's been moving through our process. We're hearing a lot from the important voice of the rivers and the creeks. We're not hearing from all parties in this issue. So I'm uncomfortable doing something outside of our policy framework for that and some other reasons. And then I hate to use a blunt metaphor, but you need to cut some wood, so you need a saw, and the tool here is a hammer. And you're not going to cut the wood and achieve the outcome you want with this tool that is being advocated for. We have to have the right tool, the right people lined up, work in a collaborative process. But I want to say I'm optimistic that we're not going to go into a cycle of insanity, because we have an administration that has in an action plan stated that in-stream flows is important. I'm not sure you had that before, Board Member Dodek, in your long history of working on these issues. I think there's an awakening in our state that we're at the limits, and that we have to work together as Californians in each watershed and come up with a balanced approach for all beneficial uses. And so, I'm encouraged that we have staff to be able to work on it, that we're going to have regional board and water rights division coordination, unlike we've ever seen. And so, like Fran, it's very important to me that we have follow through and that we're able to tell a story as the action plan's implemented, where we've accomplished some collaborative, effective outcomes that create a better balance for our water resources. So I second the motion.
Can I acknowledge Mr. Moore's excellent comments? If he will in turn acknowledge for me that it's a hammer with cotton tips, because we've been told all along that a 4C listing will not result in any action. So you really can't call it a true hammer.
Good. That's why I was worried about the metaphor.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
And anyone abstaining?
Abstaining.
Thank you. Do we need to adopt anything additional? There were no...
There was one late change.
One late change, yes.
I believe
Should
that was
we
mentioned earlier.
mention that?
Did that include, was the motion to include the late change?
Does it?
The change.
See, Mr. Laufer would have corrected, Board Member Diadamo before we
The
voted.
change sheet deals with the responses to comments, not the actual.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Then we're fine.
Okay. Thank you. Then we have accepted the resolution, proposed resolution. And now we are adjourned.